The coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but Thaddeus Merrick kept the cup close to his lips anyway, a prop in the performance of normalcy he'd been perfecting for 3 years. The Copper Kettle Diner occupied a corner lot in Millhaven, Oregon, where the Cascade foothills met farmland that stretched toward Idaho. Population 4,200. No stoplights. One diner that served breakfast until 2 in the afternoon and smelled perpetually of maple syrup and burnt coffee. It was exactly the kind of place where a man could disappear into ordinariness. Thad had chosen the corner booth for its strategic advantages without consciously acknowledging why. Back to the wall. Clear sightline to the entrance and kitchen. Exit through the kitchen accessible if needed. Old habits calcified into instinct. Muscle memory that refused to forget. The lunch crowd had thinned to scattered regulars. A farmer reading yesterday's newspaper. 2 elderly women dissecting someone's failed marriage over chicken salad. A trucker at the counter calculating fuel costs. Tuesday afternoon in late September carried the particular quality of light that made everything look slightly faded. Thad had been working through a Denver omelet while his laptop displayed a spreadsheet tracking inventory for Merrick Agricultural Supply, the feed store he'd bought with his settlement money. The business was legitimate, profitable even, selling fertilizer and fencing wire to people who asked no questions beyond delivery schedules. This was his life now, spreadsheets and supply chains. The careful construction of an existence so mundane it became invisible. The waitress had been refilling waters when Thad noticed her trajectory shift. Her name tag read Celine in faded letters. She was maybe 25, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, the kind of pretty that got overlooked in small towns. But her eyes carried something else entirely, a hyper-awareness he recognized immediately because he'd spent years cultivating the same quality. She approached with the coffee pot in her right hand, her left hand invisible behind her apron ties. Her smile was professional, practiced, completely at odds with the tension he could see in the tendons of her neck. "Warm that up for you?" Her voice was steady, but Thad caught the microscopic tremor underneath. She wasn't afraid of him. That much was clear from the way she held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds longer than necessary deliberate communication that something was happening beneath the surface. "Please." Thad shifted the cup toward her, his movements deliberately casual. His peripheral vision had already cataloged the rest of the diner's occupants, searching for whatever had triggered her alert state. Celine poured coffee with her right hand while her left emerged from behind the apron. As she set the pot down to wipe a non-existent spill, her fingers brushed his hand brief. Deliberate contact that left something behind. Paper, folded small, and pressed into his palm with practiced efficiency. She was already stepping back, coffee pot retrieved, and smile still in place. "Anything else I can get you?" "No, thank you." Thad's voice matched her casual tone even as his fingers closed around the note. "Just the check when you get a chance." "Of course." She moved away toward the kitchen, her pace neither hurried nor slow. Perfect. Unremarkable. Thad waited until she'd pushed through the kitchen's swinging door before unfolding the paper beneath the table. The handwriting was cramped, words pressed hard. "Don't move. Man behind you. Weapon under tray. He's been watching you for 20 minutes. When he leaves, I need your help. Please. I'm running out of time." The words hit his nervous system before his conscious mind finished processing them. Adrenaline flooded his bloodstream with the particular clarity that came from training overriding civilian instincts. His eyes didn't move toward the threat that would be amateur hour. Instead, he shifted his laptop screen's angle until the black mirror of its sleeping display gave him what he needed. The reflection was distorted but sufficient. A man sat 3 booths back, dark jacket despite the lingering warmth, baseball cap pulled low, hands hidden beneath a newspaper that hadn't turned a page. The man's tray sat untouched burger, fries, and the kind of meal that would get cold during surveillance. And yes, there beneath the tray's edge, the outline of something that didn't belong in a small-town diner. Thad's pulse hammered, but his breathing stayed controlled. 3 years of civilian life hadn't erased the training that had been beaten into him during 6 years of work he wasn't supposed to talk about. Work that had ended badly in Bogota with betrayal and blood, and a deal that traded silence for a new identity. Thaddeus Merrick hadn't existed before 3 years ago. The man he'd been before had supposedly died in a warehouse fire that consumed evidence, along with several inconvenient witnesses. The people who'd arranged his death and resurrection had promised him safety in exchange for permanent disappearance. Someone had broken that promise. The man behind him shifted position. Thad caught it in the reflection, a hand emerging from beneath the newspaper, fingers adjusting something at waist level. Not drawing yet, just checking. His mind ran calculations. Distance to the kitchen 15 feet. Distance to the front exit 20 feet. Crossing the shooter's line of fire. Cover options none adequate. His own weapon was in the truck. Useless. Because men trying to live normal lives didn't carry guns to buy feed supplies. But Solene had seen it. Solene had recognized danger and done something about it. Something that required courage most people couldn't access. She'd warned him despite whatever fear was making her hands shake. And then she'd asked for help. "I'm running out of time." Thad folded the note with fingers that showed none of the tension coiling through his chest. He picked up his coffee cup, the movement masking his left hand's migration toward the butter knife beside his plate. Inadequate, but better than nothing. The man behind him stood up. The sound was distinct. Chair scraping linoleum, fabric rustling, weight shifting. Thad's reflection in the laptop screen showed the figure moving, positioning for a better angle. The jacket opened with practiced ease. In the kitchen, visible through the service window, Solene stood frozen. Her eyes met Thad's across the distance, and in that moment he saw his own past reflected back the trapped desperation, the calculated courage, the understanding that some situations offered only terrible choices. Thad's fingers closed around the butter knife. The door chimed as someone new entered the diner, and everything that had been coiling toward explosion suddenly froze, waiting to see which direction the future would break. The newcomer was a state trooper, his uniform crisp despite dusty boots. He moved with the particular awareness of law enforcement entering an unfamiliar space, eyes cataloging exits and occupants before settling on the counter. Behind Thad, the man in the baseball cap became instantly, completely still, the kind of stillness that screamed wrong. The jacket closed. The newspaper rustled back into position. 3 seconds of frozen calculation before the decision arrived. Tactical withdrawal was better than confrontation with witnesses and badges. Thad watched through his laptop's reflection as the man retreated toward the back hallway where restrooms provided cover for departure through the kitchen's service exit. The burger and fries remained untouched evidence of surveillance poorly disguised as lunch. The trooper ordered coffee and pie, oblivious to the violence that had been seconds from erupting. He chatted with Solene about road conditions, his presence transforming the diner back into what it was supposed to be, a safe space where the worst danger was cholesterol. Thad waited until the man's silhouette disappeared completely before allowing his grip on the butter knife to loosen. His heartbeat slowly downshifted from combat readiness to something approaching normal. Solene moved through the diner with mechanical efficiency, avoiding Thad's section entirely, a deliberate absence that felt louder than conversation. 20 minutes passed. The trooper finished his pie and left. The farmer departed. The elderly women paid their check and exact change counted twice. The diner emptied until only Thad remained. Through the service window, he could see Solene speaking to the cook, an older man who nodded and disappeared toward what Thad assumed was an office. Solene emerged carrying a fresh pot of coffee. She moved directly to Thad's booth without pretense and sat down across from him without asking permission. Up close, he could see the faded bruise on her left wrist, mostly hidden by her sleeve, the too careful way she moved her left shoulder. The dark circles suggesting sleep was something she'd forgotten how to find. "Thank you for not running." Her voice was low, controlled despite the tremor underneath. Most people would have bolted or gotten themselves killed trying to be a hero. Who was he? Thad kept his voice level, professional. "I don't know his name, but I know who sent him." Solene's fingers wrapped around the coffee pot's handle. "They've been looking for you. Tall, scars on his hands, expensive watches. He comes to town every few weeks, asks questions, shows people photos. Usually people say they haven't seen anything." Thad's jaw tightened. "How long?" 3 months. Maybe 4. She paused. "You didn't know you'd been compromised?" "No." The admission tasted like failure. "I recognized you from your truck," Solene continued. "Not you specifically, but what you were trying to do disappear. Start over. Pretend the past doesn't follow. I've been trying to do the same thing for 2 years." Thad studied her face, seeing past the exhaustion to the intelligence operating beneath. Your note said you needed help. I do. The admission came out raw. But first, you need to understand what you've gotten yourself into. The man who is about to shoot you? He'll be back. They don't give up. I'm aware of how it works. The words came out harder than intended. Solene nodded. Military? Something like that. Then you know what it's like to be trapped in a life you didn't choose. To wake up every morning wondering if this is the day everything falls apart. The accuracy hit too close to home. Thad had spent 3 years doing exactly that, sleeping in clothes that could double as running gear, keeping his truck gassed, maintaining accounts under careful aliases. Tell me what kind of help you need, he said, and why you're asking me specifically. Solene glanced toward the kitchen, confirming they were alone. Because you're the first person who's walked into this diner in 2 years who looked at the exits before looking at the menu. The first person who sat with his back to the wall. The first person who moved like someone trained to respond to threats. She pulled her sleeve up deliberately, revealing the full extent of the bruise that wrapped her wrist like a bracelet of purple and yellow. I need someone who understands violence. Not the kind that explodes unpredictably, but the kind that can be controlled, directed, used strategically to solve problems the law can't or won't touch. You're asking me to hurt someone. I'm asking you to help me disappear for real this time. Solene corrected. Which probably requires removing the person who's made sure I can't. His name is Cormac Voss. He's my husband legally and my captor in every other sense. And in 3 days, he's going to do something that makes running impossible. She reached into her apron pocket and withdrew a folded photograph, sliding it across the table. Thad opened it to reveal a little girl, maybe 4 years old, caught mid-laugh on a tire swing. Dark hair, bright eyes, pure joy, that only existed before the world taught you to be afraid. Her name is Marin. She's my daughter. Solene's voice cracked. She's staying with Cormac's sister in Boise right now. But in 3 days, Cormac's taking her to his family compound in Montana. Once she's behind those gates, I'll never get her back. The law won't help. Cormac's family owns half the county officials up there. Thad looked at the photograph, seeing the innocence that would be systematically destroyed. You want me to get her back? I want you to help me get her back, Solene corrected. And then make sure Cormac understands that if he comes looking, he won't like what he finds. I've spent 2 years being afraid. I'm done with that. But I can't do this alone. She leaned forward, her intensity pinning him to the booth. You're not from here. You don't have roots to protect. And based on the fact someone just tried to kill you, you're already dealing with problems that make mine look manageable. So here's what I'm offering. I help you figure out who compromised you and how to fix it. And you help me rescue my daughter and start over. The proposal was insane, dangerous, exactly the kind of complication Thad had spent 3 years avoiding. But the photograph of that little girl kept pulling his attention. The unguarded joy, the innocence that deserved protection. And Solene's eyes, which reminded him of another pair from another life, his sister Maya, who'd looked at him the same way 2 decades ago when their stepfather's violence had escalated, asking without words if her big brother was going to do something. He'd been 12 then, too small and too weak. Maya had died in a car accident 3 months later that everyone pretended wasn't suspicious. Thad had spent the next 15 years making sure he'd never be too small or too weak again. Now here was another woman asking for help, another child in danger. 3 days isn't much time, he said carefully. Solene's expression shifted relief mixed with fierce determination. I know where Cormac's sister lives. I know her schedule. I know when Marin will be alone with just one babysitter who's barely 18. You've been planning this. For 16 months. Solene's smile was sharp. Ever since the last time Cormac put me in the hospital. I've been documenting everything. Saving money, mapping, escape routes. The only thing I was missing was someone capable of handling the execution. She pulled out her phone, showing him screens of documentation, photographs of injuries, recordings of threats, financial records showing systematic control, an entire case built in secret. You're not helpless, Thad observed. You're strategic. I've been helpless, Solene corrected quietly. I'm done with that. Now I'm just dangerous and patient. But patience runs out when your daughter's future gets measured in days. Thad looked at the photograph one more time, seeing Maya's face superimposed over Marin's. He tried to build a different life, tried to prove violence could stay buried. But maybe some skills weren't meant to be retired. Maybe some fights chose you regardless. Tell me everything about Cormac Voss, Thad said. His schedule, his habits, his weaknesses, and then tell me exactly what success looks like. Soline's expression transformed trapped desperation replaced by focused intensity. Success looks like Marin growing up somewhere she doesn't have to learn to hide. Success looks like Cormac understanding I'm not property. And success looks like both of us solving our respective problems so we can actually disappear. She extended her hand across the table. Do we have a deal? Thad looked at her hand, then at the photograph, then at the diner's empty interior where violence had nearly erupted. He thought about Maya and all the children he hadn't saved and the man he'd been before fear taught him to hide. His hand closed around Soline's. We have a deal. And with those words, Thaddeus Merrick, the feed store owner, began dissolving back into the operator he'd been before, the man who'd learned that sometimes the only answer to violence was more controlled violence, delivered with precision. The future had 3 days to prepare. It wouldn't be enough. The diner closed at 3 o'clock. Soline flipped the door sign to closed and pulled the blinds while Thad moved his truck to the back lot. The cook, Vernon, deaf in his left ear since Vietnam, and strategically oblivious, left with a knowing nod and instructions to lock up properly. They reconvened at the corner booth. Soline spread her documentation across the table. Photographs, handwritten notes, a spiral notebook filled with observations, the accumulated evidence of systematic abuse and meticulous planning. Thad studied the materials with analytical focus. Cormac Voss stared back from multiple photographs, mid-30s, the kind of face that probably passed for handsome if you ignored the coldness in his eyes. 6'2", maybe 200 pounds, going soft around the middle. Ex-Marine, dishonorably discharged. He tells people he got out because he disagreed with policy, Soline said. But I found court-martial paperwork once. Assault and conduct unbecoming. They wanted him gone. What's his family's business? Officially? Logging and timber processing. 4,000 acres in northwest Montana. Unofficially? Soline pulled out news articles. The DEA investigated them 3 years ago for suspected methamphetamine production. Nothing stuck, they're too smart, too tight. But everyone knows the Voss compound is where you go if you need things the law says you can't have. Thad absorbed the information. Criminal enterprise protected by geography, family loyalty, and likely payoffs to local law enforcement. Tell me about the compound's security. Soline flipped to a hand-drawn map, showing impressive detail. 12 buildings total. Main house, 5 smaller houses for brothers and families, workshop, generator shed, 2 outbuildings, bunkhouse for security, chain-link fence, 8 feet high, barbed wire, 2 gates, main entrance with camera, service entrance usually chained but not monitored. How many people on site? 15 to 20. Varies. Fewer at night. The wives don't like staying too isolated. Most live in town. But they're taking Marin there. Soline's expression hardened, because Cormac's decided it's time to properly raise her in the family tradition. His mother thinks I've made her too independent. A few months with them will break that spirit. The bitterness carried years of accumulated resentment. Where's Cormac now? Working a contract in Washington, tree removal. Gone until Friday when he's supposed to drive to Boise, pick up Marin, and take her to Montana for the weekend. Except the weekend will become permanent. And his sister's schedule? Soline pulled up her phone. Kira works at a dental office, 8 to 5. Drops her kids at school before work. Babysitter teenage girl named Paisley watches Marin from 3:30 until Kira gets home around 5:30. Paisley's reliable but distracted. Spends most of her time on social media. What's Kira's relationship with Cormac like? Loyal. She worships him. Thinks he rescued her from an abusive boyfriend. Doesn't understand he just replaced one controller with another. She'd never voluntarily give Marin back. The picture crystallized into familiar patterns. Insular family structure. Shared mythology about masculine protection. Control that made escape nearly impossible without outside intervention. You said you'd help me figure out who compromised me, Thad said, shifting focus. What makes you think you can? Soline's smile was thin. Because your guy's been asking questions all over town, And Millhaven has a diner where everyone stops to eat, and a waitress they've learned to ignore. People say things when they think the help isn't listening. She pulled out another notebook filled with overheard conversations. Your guy's name is Kovacs. He works for someone in Seattle who's very interested in finding a man matching your description. Ex-military, bought a business with cash about 3 years ago. They've been checking every small town within 200 miles of the Canadian border. Thad's jaw tightened. Kovacs. Professional hunters meant his disappearance hadn't been accepted as permanent. What else did you hear? He mentioned a woman in Spokane who might have information. Former agency, owed his boss a favor. They were planning to move on her this week. Thad's blood went cold. Maya's friend. Had to be. Sarah Chen, who'd helped arrange his extraction. If they'd identified her, they could pressure her into revealing his location. When was this conversation? 2 days ago. 2 days. Which meant they might have already moved. Might have already extracted information. I need to make a call. Thad pulled out his phone. Hesitated. If they'd compromised Sarah, they might be monitoring her communications. But if they hadn't gotten to her yet, she deserved warning. He walked to the corner, dialing a number he'd memorized but never saved, using a routing protocol that bounced the call through 3 countries. 4 rings, then voicemail. It's me, Thad said quietly. If you're hearing this, assume you've been compromised. Implement Protocol Black and Ghost. They're actively hunting. Take it seriously. He ended the call and immediately removed the phone's battery. When he returned to the booth, Solene was watching him. She's important to you. She saved my life once. Helped me disappear when that was the only option left. Thad sat down heavily. If they've gotten to her, my location is already compromised. Coming back here might be walking into a trap. Then we accelerate the timeline, Solene said without hesitation. Get Marin tomorrow instead of waiting. Hit them while they're unprepared. That increases risk significantly. Risk was always significant, Solene countered. The only question is whether we accept it or let fear paralyze us. She was right. Thad had spent 3 years choosing inaction disguised as strategic patience, telling himself he was being smart when really he was being afraid. Afraid that using his skills would remind him of who he'd been. But fear had solved nothing. I need to tell you something, Thad said. So you understand exactly who you're asking for help. Solene waited. My real name isn't Thaddeus Merrick. That identity was constructed 3 years ago when the people I worked for decided I knew too much. I was part of a unit that didn't exist, doing work that couldn't be acknowledged. We called ourselves contractors because it sounded better than mercenaries. He paused, checking her face for judgment, finding only steady attention. The operation that ended my career involved a cartel leader in Colombia who'd been facilitating weapons transfers. The math got complicated. He was an asset until he became a liability. Someone on our team was working both sides, feeding information to the cartel. 3 of us made it out. 1 died 2 weeks later in a car accident that wasn't an accident. Another disappeared completely. And I got offered a deal. Accept death officially and resurrection unofficially. Maintain silence permanently. But someone didn't honor the deal, Solene said. Someone decided dead wasn't sufficient. Maybe they discovered I'd kept insurance documentation that could bring down careers. Maybe they just don't trust silence will last. Either way, they're hunting, or they're professional. Thad leaned forward. So when you ask me to help you, understand you're asking someone who's already marked for death to risk additional visibility. Someone whose skill set was developed to hurt people efficiently, and who's spent 3 years trying to prove he could be something else. Someone who might be exactly the monster you need, but definitely isn't the hero you deserve. Solene absorbed this, her expression thoughtful rather than frightened. When I was 19, I thought love was intensity and jealousy, proved someone cared, she said. Cormac was older, confident, had answers. He seemed like stability. By the time I realized the stability was a cage, I was pregnant and isolated and convinced leaving was impossible. She looked at Marin's photograph. 3 months ago, Cormac broke my collarbone because I disrespected him by disagreeing about what Marin should wear. I was in the hospital, and this nurse asked me point blank, "How many more birthdays are you going to survive before he kills you? Not if, when." And she asked me what message I was teaching my daughter by staying. Tears pooled in Soline's eyes but didn't fall. That nurse probably doesn't remember, but I remember it every day. Teaching Marin to survive abuse wasn't love, it was condemning her to repeat my mistakes. The most loving thing I could do was show her that some situations require you to fight even when fighting seems impossible. She met Thad's gaze directly. So no, you're not the hero I deserve. You're the weapon I need, and I'm not asking you to be something you're not. I'm asking you to be exactly what you are, someone who understands that sometimes violence is the only language certain people speak. If that makes you a monster, then I'm asking a monster for help, and I'm not ashamed. The honesty hit Thad harder than any judgment could have. She wasn't asking him to pretend to be redeemed. She was asking him to use the skills that made him dangerous in service of something that mattered. He thought about Maya again, about the 12-year-old boy who'd been too weak to protect his sister. About the man he'd become in response, the operator who'd learned to turn weakness into lethality. About the 3 years he'd spent hiding from his own capacity for violence. Maybe the answer wasn't redemption. Maybe it was direction, using what you were in service of what mattered. Tomorrow morning, 4 a.m., I'll pick you up here, Thad said. We'll drive to Boise, observe and confirm patterns. If the opportunity presents itself, we take Marin and Ghost. If complications arise, we adapt. And Cormac? We'll deal with Cormac, Thad promised, his voice carrying cold certainty. One way or another, he'll understand that you and Marin are no longer available. I'll make sure the message is delivered clearly. Soline extended her hand again. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Thad said, as their hands clasped. Thank me when Marin's safe and you're somewhere Cormac can't reach. That's all any of us are, Soline replied. Desperate people gambling on impossible things because the alternative is giving up, and I'm done giving up. Thad nodded, feeling something shift in his chest, the careful walls he'd built around his capacity for violence beginning to dissolve, the operator he'd tried to bury rising back to the surface. 3 years of hiding had taught him nothing except that some things couldn't be outrun. Some fights chose you, and some people like Soline, like Marin, like Maya, 2 decades too late, deserved protection, even if providing it required becoming the thing you feared most about yourself. Tomorrow, they'd drive to Boise and see if liberation was possible. Tonight, Thaddeus Merrick would make his final preparations and say goodbye to the man he'd pretended to be. The feed store owner was dead, the operator had returned, and Cormac Voss had no idea what was coming for him. The drive to Boise took 4 hours through darkness that felt both protective and exposing. Thad kept the truck at exactly the speed limit, eyes constantly checking mirrors for surveillance patterns. Soline sat in the passenger seat with a duffel bag containing everything she'd been able to pack. Clothes for her and Marin, documents she'd hidden in the diner's ceiling tiles, the cash she'd been skimming from tips $3,847 that represented 16 months of desperation, saved $1 at a time. They'd left Millhaven at 4:15. Thad had spent extra time checking his truck for tracking devices, found nothing. But absence of evidence wasn't evidence of absence. Tell me about Paisley, Thad said as they crossed into Idaho. The babysitter. What motivates her? She's 17, senior at Capitol High School, wants to study veterinary medicine at Boise State, but her parents can't afford it. She takes babysitting jobs to save for tuition. So she's motivated, responsible despite phone distraction. Thad filed the information away. What's her relationship with Kira like? Professional. Kira pays her $15 an hour, which is high for the area, so Paisley's loyal. But there's no real warmth. Kira treats her like hired help. That's useful. People who feel undervalued are easier to work with. They stopped for gas and coffee at a truck stop outside Mountain Home. Thad paid cash, kept his face angled away from cameras, changed shirts in the restroom. Soline did something similar. Different jacket, hair pulled back differently, glasses that changed her appearance enough to disrupt recognition. Kira leaves for work at 7:30, Soline said as they continued. Takes her kids to school first. House is empty until 3:30 when Paisley arrives with Marin. That's our window. Too exposed, Thad said. Breaking into an empty house in daylight creates witnesses. We wait for Paisley and Marin to arrive, then move during transition. That gives Paisley time to see us. Not if we're smart. Thad had been running scenarios since they'd left. What's the house's layout? Solene pulled up photos, screenshots from real estate listings. Single-story ranch, 3 bedrooms, attached garage, fenced backyard with a gate. Paisley parks in the pumps and the punks and the pumps and the pumps and the funks in a 5. Driveway, brings Marin in through the front door. They go straight to the living room. Paisley makes snacks, sets Marin up with cartoons, then settles on the couch with her phone. Does the backyard have visibility from neighbors? Partial. East side has clear view. West side blocked by trees. Back fence connects to an alley. That's our approach. We park 2 blocks away, enter through the alley, come over the back fence. I'll handle Paisley while you get Marin. 90 seconds if we're efficient. Handle Paisley how? Non-lethally, non-violently if possible, Thad clarified. Restrain her, disable her phone, and make it clear cooperation keeps her safe. She's a civilian, not an enemy. The distinction mattered. There were lines he'd crossed before that still lived behind his eyes at night. This mission was complicated enough without adding unnecessary harm. They reached Boise as dawn painted the sky amber and rose. The city was waking early commuters, joggers, and the daily resurrection of normal life where most people's problems involve traffic and deadlines. Thad drove past Kira's house twice, maintaining normal speed. The house looked exactly like its photographs. Beige siding, brown trim, lawn needing mowing, and children's toys on the porch. A basketball hoop in the driveway. Nothing suggested the violence lurking in its connections. They parked in a grocery store lot 3 blocks away. Thad locked his phone in the glove box. It would only be a liability now. Solene did the same after sending a single text. My friend Nadia, Solene explained. If something goes wrong and I don't contact her by 8 tonight, she'll notify media with the documentation I've collected. Insurance in case Cormac involves law enforcement and paints me as the criminal. Smart. Thad checked his watch. 3:47 p.m. Paisley should arrive in about 40 minutes. We move into position at 4, wait for her to settle, then execute at 4:15. They spent the next 20 minutes running through the plan, identifying failure points, establishing contingencies. Each question required an answer. Each answer created new questions. At 4:03, they approached through the alley, moving casually. Thad wore a utility vest that made him look like a contractor. Solene carried a clipboard. Just people doing jobs, nothing to see here. The alley was empty. Dogs barked from enclosed yards. A cat watched from a fence post with territorial suspicion. Thad marked each sound, building an acoustic map against which deviations would register. Kira's back fence was 6 feet of weathered cedar with a gate secured by a simple latch. Thad tested it unlocked. They slipped into the backyard, a space dominated by a plastic play structure and a sandbox. Through the sliding glass door, Thad could see into a kitchen with outdated appliances and cluttered counters. No movement. The house was still empty. They positioned themselves behind the play structure, where angles made them, invisible from the house while maintaining clear view. Solene's breathing had accelerated. Thad placed a hand on her shoulder. Slow breath in, hold for 4, slow breath out. He instructed quietly. You're not afraid you're ready. Stay in that mindset. Solene nodded, following his breathing pattern until her tension decreased. At 4:28, a silver Honda Civic pulled into the driveway. Through the fence slats, Thad watched a young woman emerge, blonde ponytail, t-shirt, and jeans. She opened the back door and Marin climbed out, a small figure in purple leggings and a shirt decorated with cartoon horses. Thad felt Solene's body tense beside him. Her hand moved toward the fence instinctively. Not yet, Thad whispered. Let them get settled. They watched as Paisley and Marin entered through the front door. Lights came on in the living room. Television glow became visible. Paisley would be going through her routine now. Shoes off, snacks prepared, child positioned in front of screen, phone retrieved. Thad counted to 60. Then he moved. The back door was locked, but it surrendered to a credit card and practiced technique in under 15 seconds. They entered into silence, broken only by television noise, some animated show about talking animals. Through the kitchen archway, Thad could see Paisley on the couch, phone illuminated, thumbs moving. Marin sat on the floor 3 feet from the television, absorbed. Thad crossed the distance in 4 silent steps. His hand clamped over Paisley's mouth before she could scream, his other arm securing her phone. she thrashed instinctively, but he maintained control with practiced efficiency. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly but firmly near her ear. "Nod if you understand." Paisley's eyes were wide with terror, but she nodded fractionally. "Marin's mother is here to take her home. This isn't a kidnapping, it's a rescue. You're going to stay quiet, and in 2 minutes we'll be gone and you can call whoever you want. Nod again if you understand." Another nod, less panicked this time. Soline had moved into the living room, dropping to her knees in front of Marin. "Baby, it's Mama. We need to go right now." Marin turned, her face transforming from confusion to joy so pure it was almost painful to witness. "Mama!" She launched herself into Soline's arms with uncomplicated trust. "I know, baby. I missed you so much." Soline's voice cracked but held together. "But we have to leave right now. Can you be really brave for me?" "Where are we going?" "Somewhere better. Somewhere you don't have to be scared anymore." Thad zip-tied Paisley's wrists behind her back, not tight enough to hurt, but secure enough to delay pursuit. He disabled her phone's tracking and powered it down. "I'm sorry about this," he told Paisley, making sure she could see his sincerity. "You didn't do anything wrong. Tell them you couldn't stop us, that there were multiple people, that we were armed." The lie would protect her. "And consider finding a different client. The people you're working for are dangerous." He left her on the couch, able to work free eventually, but not quickly enough to matter. Soline had Marin in her arms. They moved toward the back door, retracing their entry. Thad paused at the threshold, listening for sounds suggesting neighbors had noticed. Nothing. They went over the back fence, through the alley, power walking toward the parking lot without running. Running drew attention. Walking with purpose was invisible. The truck was where they'd left it. Thad started the engine while Soline secured Marin in the back seat using a booster seat she'd hidden in the duffel premeditation that spoke to months of planning. Marin was asking questions. "Where are we going? Why did we leave so fast?" "We're going on an adventure," Soline answered, maintaining cheerful stability despite tears streaming down her face. "Just you and me for a while. Would you like that?" "Yes." Marin's enthusiasm was uncomplicated. They merged into traffic, heading north toward Nampa, taking surface streets where patrol patterns were predictable. Thad's hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind was calculating pursuit timelines. Paisley would free herself in 20 to 30 minutes. She'd call Kira, who'd call Cormac, who'd mobilize his family network. By 7 p.m., the Voss compound would know. The hunt would begin with fury that made Kovacs's pursuit look gentle. "We need to get out of Idaho," Thad said quietly. "Montana's too close to the compound. What's your preference?" "South," Soline said without hesitation. "Nevada first, then California, somewhere big enough to disappear into crowds. Los Angeles, maybe, or San Diego." It was sound reasoning. Urban anonymity was its own protection. "California it is," Thad agreed. "But first, we handle the immediate problem. Cormac. Cormac. Because running only works if pursuit becomes too costly. Otherwise, we spend the rest of our lives looking over shoulders." He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "I need to send him a message that makes continued pursuit irrational. That requires going on a fence. Are you comfortable with that?" Soline looked at Marin, who was singing softly to herself, already forgetting the strangeness of their departure. When she turned back to Thad, her expression carried cold determination. "I'm comfortable with whatever keeps my daughter safe," she said. "Do what needs doing." Thad nodded. Somewhere behind them, Cormac Voss was learning his wife and daughter had been taken. Soon, he'd learn the cost of trying to reclaim them. The sun was setting behind them, painting the road ahead in shadows that felt like permission. They drove through the night, stopping only for gas and bathroom breaks, pushing south through Nevada's empty spaces. Marin slept in the back seat, exhausted. Soline dozed intermittently, jerking awake every 20 minutes with hypervigilance. Thad stayed alert, maintaining exactly 74 in 70 zones. The radio stayed off silence, made it easier to think. By the following afternoon, they were approaching northern Arizona. The landscape transitioned into high desert where Joshua trees stood like sentinels. Thad pulled into a rest stop outside Flagstaff, a place where truckers caught sleep and families stretched road-cramped legs. "I need 2 hours," Thad said. Can you watch? Solene nodded. I've got a gun in the duffel. A 380 I bought 2 years ago. I know how to use it if I have to. Let's hope you don't. Thad reclined the seat, his body surrendering to sleep with practiced efficiency. Within 2 minutes, he was out. Solene watched him sleep, seeing details she'd missed. The scar along his jawline, the way his right hand stayed near his belt even in sleep. This was a man who'd lived hard and survived what should have killed him. She thought about the past 24 hours, how her life had transformed from trapped endurance into active liberation. Marin was sleeping peacefully in the back seat, free from the future that had been planned for her. But Solene wasn't naive enough to think extraction equaled safety. Cormac would be searching, calling in favors, mobilizing resources. Unless something fundamental changed. Unless Cormac learned that pursuit cost more than abandonment. Thad's phone buzzed. Solene glanced at the screen. A text from an unknown number, just coordinates and a time. Nothing else. She didn't wake him, the message wasn't urgent. 2 hours later, Thad woke with sudden alertness. He checked the coordinates on his phone. Northern Arizona, 6 p.m. tonight. What's in Northern Arizona? Solene asked, though part of her already knew the answer wouldn't be comforting. Resolution, Thad said simply. Cormac needs to understand continued pursuit isn't viable. That conversation happens tonight. He didn't elaborate, and Solene didn't push. By late afternoon, they were approaching the coordinates, a rest area where pine forests replaced desert. A black SUV was already parked in the far corner, tinted windows preventing identification. Stay here, Thad instructed Solene. Keep the doors locked. If anything looks wrong, you drive away immediately. Don't wait. Don't try to help. Just go. Understood? Understood. Solene's hand found the 380 inches her bag. Thad exited, approaching the SUV with measured caution. The driver's door opened, and a woman emerged mid-40s, dark hair pulled back severely, tactical pants and a jacket that didn't quite conceal the weapon at her hip. Her face was all hard angles and assessing eyes. You're late, she said without preamble. Traffic, Thad replied casually. You have him? The woman gestured to the SUV's rear. Trunk, unconscious but alive. Found him at a motel in Twin Falls, exactly where you said. He was not happy about the interruption. Kovacs doesn't strike me as someone who's happy about anything. Thad moved to the SUV's rear, popping the tailgate to reveal a man duct-taped and bound, breathing but sedated. The same man from the diner. What do you want done with him? The woman asked. Information first. Then he becomes a message. Thad's voice was flat, professional. The woman nodded. She pulled out a syringe, injecting something that would wake him without granting full motor control. Within seconds, Kovacs's eyes opened, confusion and rage competing. Welcome back, Thad said, leaning close. We're going to have a conversation about who sent you and why. You can cooperate and receive a clean death, or resist and receive something worse. Your choice. 60 seconds. The interrogation took 15 minutes, Thad asking questions with clinical precision, Kovacs initially refusing until pain made cooperation preferable. The woman assisted with detached efficiency. The information was both helpful and concerning. Kovacs worked for a private security contractor in Seattle, hired by former agency personnel who considered Thad a loose end. They'd tracked him through Sarah Chen, who'd held out for 3 days before protective instincts for her own family overrode loyalty. The compromise wasn't betrayal, it was survival. Sarah's in protective custody now, Kovacs added, speech slurred. They don't need her anymore. She told them everything. Millhaven, the feed store, your new name. They're planning to move next week. Full team, professional extraction. Standard cleanup protocol. How many people know? Thad asked. Just my contractor and his client. Small operation. You eliminate them, the trail goes cold. It was the answer Thad needed. The problem was contained, manageable. 2 men held the threat. Remove them, and the past could finally stay buried. Thank you for your cooperation, Thad said, standing. To the woman, make it clean. No torture. Just over. She nodded, understanding the distinction. Professional respect for someone who'd answered honestly. Thad returned to his truck where Soline was watching with wide eyes. "Don't ask," he said quietly. "Just know that part of the problem is handled." Minutes later, they heard the single gunshot loud in the forest, quiet, then absorbed by distance. The woman emerged, wiping her hands, and approached Thad's window. "Seattle contact is Felix Vandrow, operates out of Pioneer Square," she said, handing him a folder. "Everything you need. The client's name is in there too, bureaucrat trying to cover his ass. This is personal for him, which makes him sloppy." "I will." Thad took the folder. "What do I owe you?" "You saved my sister in Kabul 8 years ago. Pulled her out when everyone else said she was dead. I don't forget debts. We're square." She returned to the SUV, driving away. Thad looked at the folder, photographs, addresses, surveillance notes. Everything needed to eliminate the threat permanently. "What now?" Soline asked. "Now I make a phone call, and then we wait for Cormac to make his move so I can ensure he doesn't make a second one." The call went to a number that would connect through multiple relays. When answered, Thad spoke clearly. "Vandrow in Seattle. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Make it look like business deal gone wrong. No connection to me." A confirmation, then silence. Thad destroyed the phone, scattering pieces across different trash receptacles. By nightfall, they were in southern Nevada, approaching Las Vegas where lights and crowds would provide cover. Thad had been watching mirrors obsessively. Nothing yet, but Cormac would be mobilizing. At 11 p.m., Thad's phone rang with a call from an unknown number. He answered without speaking. "Mr. Merrick?" The voice was male, young and nervous. "I'm calling from Millhaven Community Hospital. There's been an incident involving a Cormac Voss. He was asking for you before they sedated him. Said to tell you he understands, and that he's withdrawing." Those were his exact words. Thad's grip tightened. "What kind of incident?" "Motor vehicle accident. His truck went off Highway 93 near Jackpot. He's going to survive, but multiple fractures, internal injuries. He'll be hospitalized for months, then rehabilitation. He won't be mobile for at least 6 months." The timing was too perfect. Someone had delivered a message more efficiently than Thad could have. A message that came with hospital bills and enforced immobility that would give Soline time to disappear completely. "Thank you for calling," Thad said, ending the conversation. He looked at Soline. "That wasn't an accident," she said quietly. "No," Thad agreed, "but we're going to accept it as one. Because asking questions means learning answers we can't afford to know." Someone else was moving pieces on this board. Someone with resources that extended beyond anything Thad had arranged. But who? And why? The answer would come later. For now, they had what they needed: time, distance, and a husband who'd learned pursuit carried costs he couldn't pay. 3 months later, Soline stood in a small apartment in San Diego's North Park neighborhood, watching Marin draw pictures at a table they'd bought from IKEA. The apartment was modest. 2 bedrooms, updated kitchen, close to a good elementary school where Marin had started kindergarten under a new name. The transformation had been systematic. New social security numbers arranged through contacts Thad had, bank accounts under careful identities, employment at a hospital where her credentials transferred without questions. The money had appeared too, a grant from a foundation she'd never heard of, covering relocation expenses and first month's rent. Then a scholarship for Marin's school. Then a car registered in her new name. Keys delivered by courier who accepted no payment. She'd initially attributed it to Thad, but he'd denied responsibility with genuine certainty. Someone else was helping. Thad had left 2 weeks after arriving in San Diego, heading to Seattle to handle unfinished business. He'd returned 3 days later with a satisfied expression and a gunshot wound in his shoulder he'd treated himself. He hadn't elaborated, and Soline hadn't asked. But whatever he'd done, it had closed that chapter. The people hunting him had stopped. The contractor Vandrow had died in a shootout. Police chalked it up to organized crime. His client had resigned and disappeared from public life. The connections that threatened Thad had been severed permanently. Now he visited twice a week, bringing groceries, checking in, maintaining the connection they'd formed. Their relationship had evolved into something neither could quite name. Not romantic, not quite friendship, but a bond forged through shared crisis. Today's visit was different. Thad arrived carrying a folder that he set on the counter with unusual ceremony. "We need to talk," he said, his expression serious but not threatening. "Is something wrong?" "No, but you deserve to know who's really been helping us." Thad opened the folder, revealing documents, incorporation papers, tax filings, grant distributions, all connected to something called the Maya Foundation. "I didn't establish this," Thad said. "Sarah Chen did, 3 years ago when she helped me disappear. She used part of my settlement money, invested it, grew it, and turned it into a legitimate foundation that provides support to women and children escaping domestic violence. She named it after my sister, the one I couldn't save." Soline absorbed this. All the support we've received came from Sarah, operating through the foundation. She's been watching over both of us. The grants, scholarships, apartment assistance, all legitimate foundation activity directed toward us, specifically because she knows our circumstances. But why? She doesn't know me. "You're someone who asked for help and used it wisely," Thad corrected. "Sarah believes in providing resources to people who use them to build better lives. You've enrolled Marin in school, found employment, and built stability. That's exactly what the foundation was designed to support." He pulled out another document, a letter addressed to Soline, handwritten. "She asked me to give you this." Soline opened the letter. "Dear Soline, you don't know me, but I know what it means to rebuild after violence destroys your foundation. 15 years ago, I was in a similar situation. Someone helped me then, asked nothing in return, and gave me the chance to become someone who could help others. The support you've received isn't charity. It's investment in the future you're building for your daughter. Use it to create the life you both deserve. When you're stable, consider helping others who are where you were. That's how we honor those who saved us, by saving others in turn. You're stronger than you know. Your daughter will grow up understanding strength through watching you refuse to accept what others said was inevitable." Sarah Soline felt tears tracking down her face, first she'd allowed since arriving in San Diego. "I'd like to meet her," Soline said, "to thank her. She travels frequently, same as me, but she visits San Diego sometimes. When she does, I'll arrange it." Marin called from the living room, asking if they could go to the park. Soline wiped her eyes and called back they'd go in a few minutes. "What happens now?" she asked Thad. "For you. You've solved your problem. Are you going back to Millhaven?" "No. Millhaven was hiding, not living. I'm done with that. Sarah's offered me work with the Foundation's security consulting, helping women in situations where official systems can't intervene, using what I am in service of what matters." "That's good. You should do that. What about you?" Sarah mentioned the Foundation could use someone with your background. Medical coordinator for women leaving dangerous situations, helping them navigate healthcare, documenting injuries, providing support that combines nursing with understanding. The offer surprised her briefly. Of course Sarah would think of that. "I'd like that, but only part-time. Marin needs stability more than we need money right now." Sarah anticipated that. "The position's flexible as much or as little as you want." Thad smiled. "She's good at understanding what people need." They sat in comfortable silence, the weight of the past 3 months settling into something that felt almost like peace. "I never asked you something," Soline said suddenly. "That day in the diner, when I slipped you the note, why didn't you just leave? You could have walked out, handled Kovacs on your own, and avoided all this complication. Why did you stay?" Thad considered the question. "Because you saw me. Not the feed store owner pretending to be normal, not the operator I used to be. You saw someone capable of protection and asked for it without shame. You recognized that violence could be redirected, that the same capacity that makes someone dangerous can also make them necessary." He paused, organizing thoughts. "For 3 years, I'd been trying to prove I could be something other than what I was trained to be. But you didn't ask me to be different. You asked me to be exactly what I was, just pointed in a better direction. That felt like permission I didn't know I needed. Permission to be yourself? Permission to accept that some skills don't retire. They just wait for situations that justify their use. I'm never going to be the civilian I pretended to be. But maybe I don't have to be. Maybe there's space for people like me who understand violence well enough to deploy it precisely, who can be dangerous in service of protecting people who shouldn't have to be dangerous themselves." Soline reached across the table, her hand finding his. "You saved us. Not just from Cormac, but from the future he'd planned. Marin gets to be a child. That's because of you. That's because of both of us, Thad corrected. You planned for 16 months. You had courage to approach a stranger. All I did was provide the skills your plan required. Still, thank you for being exactly who I needed when I needed it. Thad squeezed her hand briefly. Thank you for trusting me, for seeing what I could be instead of what I'd been, for asking me to fight instead of hide. Marin appeared in the doorway, impatient. Park now? Park now? Solene agreed. To Thad, come with us. You can push her on the swings. They walked together through North Park's tree-lined streets, Marin skipping ahead. The playground was crowded with families, children screaming with joy on slides and swings. Thad pushed Marin on the swings while Solene watched, seeing the careful gentleness in his movements. This was a man who knew exactly how much force was required to break things, which meant he also knew exactly how much was required to not break them. An hour later, walking back, Marin held both their hands, swinging between them and demanding they lift her on the count of 3. They obliged, her laughter pure and uncomplicated. She's going to be okay, Thad observed quietly. You both are. Thanks to you, and Sarah, and everyone who decided we mattered enough to help. No, Thad corrected gently. You're going to be okay because you decided you mattered enough to fight. Everything else was just support for a decision you made yourself. Never forget that. You saved yourself. The rest of us just provided tools and removed obstacles. That night, after Marin was asleep and Thad had left, Solene stood at her apartment window watching San Diego's lights spread across the darkness. Somewhere in this city, women were hiding in closets, believing escape was impossible. Somewhere, children were learning to be small, to be quiet, and to disappear. She thought about Sarah's letter, about the suggestion that healing meant helping others heal, about turning survival into service. Maybe in a year, when Marin was more settled, Solene would take that position, start attending to women in similar situations, offering them what she'd received, recognition that they deserved protection, resources to make escape possible, proof that building new lives was achievable. She pulled out her phone and composed a text to Sarah's foundation contact. Thank you for everything. I'd like to start part-time when you think I'm ready. Not just receiving help, but giving it. Because you're right, we honor those who saved us by saving others. The response came within minutes. Whenever you're ready, we're here. And Solene, you already saved the person who mattered most. Everything else is just extending that success outward. Welcome to the family. Solene smiled, feeling something she hadn't experienced in 6 years. Genuine hope that the future held more than survival. In Seattle, Sarah Chen sat in a coffee shop monitoring foundation accounts and planning interventions for 17 women currently requiring resources, support, and sometimes the kind of help that official systems couldn't provide. She'd built this from nothing, from her own survival and Thad's settlement money, and the belief that people deserved protection. One more woman had escaped successfully. One more child would grow up without learning to hide. The numbers added up slowly, but they added up. She closed her laptop and looked out at Seattle's rain-soaked streets, thinking about Maya, the girl she'd never met but whose name had become a promise. A promise that women wouldn't have to die in accidents. A promise that children wouldn't watch their mothers disappear into compliance and fear. Thad had helped one woman because she'd asked him to scare away monsters. In doing so, he'd scared away his own, the belief that his capacity for violence made redemption impossible. Sometimes monsters did fight other monsters, and sometimes, in the aftermath, everyone emerged more human than they'd been before. The rain continued falling on Seattle, on San Diego, on all the places where people fought private wars. And in those places, quietly, networks of support built themselves into infrastructure that caught people when they fell and helped them climb towards something better. It wasn't justice. Justice would have prevented the harm in the first place. But it was something. And sometimes, when circumstances allowed and courage aligned with opportunity, something was enough to change everything. Thank you for following this story. If you're enjoying these narratives of courage and redemption, write in the comments where you're watching from, and share your own stories of when someone helped you escape an impossible situation. Your support means everything, and helps me continue bringing you these stories of people who refuse to accept what others say is inevitable. Until next time, remember, asking for help isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing we can do. And sometimes, the help we need comes from the most unexpected places, in forms we never imagined. Stay safe, stay strong, and know that you matter.